She grabbed my arm with both hands. Not a tap, not a polite touch on the shoulder. Both hands, firm, the grip of a woman who had decided she was going to stop me from boarding that plane and had committed to it completely. I was 3 people from the front of the line. The gate agent had already started scanning boarding passes. The jetway door was open. I could feel the particular forward momentum of a line that has started moving and does not want to be interrupted. She stopped me anyway. "Sir." Her voice was low, urgent, the voice of someone who has been rehearsing a sentence for 20 minutes and has finally decided to say it. "Sir, I need to speak with you for a moment. I was sitting behind your family in the gate area. I heard everything they said." I looked at her. A woman in her early 60s, gray hair cut short, a carry-on bag on wheels beside her, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead in the way of a person who had been using them recently and had pushed them up to look at me more clearly. Her expression was not dramatic. It was the expression of a person who had been wrestling with a decision and had landed on the right side of it and was now bearing the weight of what the right side required. She said, "What they were planning. You need to know before you get on that plane." I stepped out of the line. "My name is George Tillman. I am 67 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, in the house on Maple Creek Drive that my wife Beverly and I bought in 1997, and that I have lived in alone since Beverly passed 3 years ago. I am a retired pharmacist, 31 years behind a counter and a computer, filling prescriptions, counseling patients, learning more about human beings through their medications than most people would be comfortable knowing. I retired in 2020, which turned out to be an interesting year to begin having time on your hands, and I have spent the years since building the kind of quiet life that a man builds when the person he built the loud life with is no longer beside him. I have 2 children, a son named Philip, who is 43, and a daughter named Renata, who is 40. I love them both. I need to say that first and mean it completely, before I tell you what I heard in a Nashville airport on a Tuesday morning in September that made me walk away from a boarding line and call my attorney before the plane I was supposed to be on left the ground. I love my children. What they were planning was not something a father expects from people he loves. And the woman with the reading glasses pushed up on her forehead was the reason I found out about it before it was too late to do anything. Her name was Miriam Cole. She changed everything. Before I go any further, I want to say something to everyone here. If you are new to this community, welcome. These are real stories about real people who held their ground when someone tried to take what was theirs. Hit that subscribe button right now and drop a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. Your city, your country. I want to know who is out there tonight. And press that like button before you keep reading. It takes 1 second and it means everything to us. Now, let me tell you how I got to that airport. The trip had been Philip's idea. He called me in August, about 6 weeks before the September morning in question, and his voice had in it the particular warmth he deployed when he wanted something. Not a manipulative warmth. Philip is not a manipulative man in the crude sense, but he is a man who has always understood that the presentation of an idea matters as much as the idea itself, and he had learned this quality from me, which means I recognized it immediately, and which also means it still worked on me more often than I like to admit. He said, "Dad, Renata and I have been talking. We think you need a break. You have been in that house alone for 3 years, and you have not taken a real trip since Mom passed, and we want to do something about that. We want to take you somewhere. Just the 3 of us. Like we used to do when we were kids." I told him that sounded like a fine idea. He said, "We were thinking Costa Rica. 10 days. We found a place on the Pacific coast. Beach, good food, nothing to think about except getting some rest." He paused. "You deserve it, Dad. You have been carrying a lot." I had been carrying a lot. That part was true. The years after Beverly had been the hardest of my life, and the loneliness of a large house that was built for 2 people, and is occupied by 1, is a specific kind of weight that does not announce itself dramatically, but is present every morning and every evening and in every room that still holds the shape of the person who is gone. Costa Rica sounded like the opposite of all of that. I said yes. I booked the flights myself. Nashville to Houston connecting to San Jose. Departure Tuesday morning, September 12th. I packed a bag with the efficient lightness of a man who had spent 3 years with nowhere particular to go and was genuinely looking forward to somewhere. What I did not know, packing that bag on Monday evening, was that Philip and Renata had arrived in Nashville the day before. They had not told me they were coming early. They said they wanted to get to the airport with time to spare, which I accepted without questioning because it was a reasonable thing to say. They had been in Nashville for 18 hours before we met at the airport Tuesday morning. Those 18 hours were the hours that mattered. Those were the hours Miriam Cole was going to tell me about in the boarding line at gate C-14. Let me tell you what I knew about my financial situation before that Tuesday morning, because you need to understand the ground before you understand what was being built on it without my knowledge. Beverly and I had been careful people, not wealthy in the way that word gets thrown around, but substantial in the way that two people who worked steadily and lived within their means for 40 years become substantial without making a great production of it. My pharmacist's income over 31 years, Beverly's income as a dental hygienist for 24 years before she retired, a house that had appreciated considerably in a Nashville market that had been doing things to property values that neither of us had anticipated when we bought on Maple Creek Drive in 1997, a retirement account I had been funding since I was 32. Investments Beverly had managed with a precision and patience I had always admired and never fully matched. When Beverly passed, I inherited everything outright. That is how our wills had always been structured. Straightforward, clean, the way two people who trusted each other completely arranged things. I updated my own will after Beverly died. I left everything equally to Philip and Renata, which had always been the plan, and which I had told them directly, because I believed in transparency about these things, and because I had nothing to hide. What I had not told them, because it had not occurred to me that it was relevant to tell them, was the specific number, the total, the accumulated figure that 31 years of careful living and 40 years of Beverly's investment management had produced. I found out later that Philip had found out the number, not from me, from a document he should not have had access to, and which I will explain in a moment. The number was enough to make a man who had a struggling restaurant in Knoxville and a daughter who had credit card debt she had mentioned once and then never mentioned again, make plans on a Tuesday morning in September that they had not discussed with their father. The airport. We met at the departures entrance at 7:15. Philip and Renata were already there when I arrived, which I noted because Philip is historically not an early arrival to anything. They were standing together near the check-in kiosks, and they had the particular energy of people who have been talking about something and have recently stopped talking about it. A specific stillness, the kind that is actually the absence of the conversation that was happening 30 seconds ago. I noticed it. I filed it away. I told myself I was being the kind of suspicious that grief makes you when you start reading things into ordinary moments, because ordinary moments now contain the gap where Beverly used to be. We checked in, we cleared security, we had breakfast at a place in the terminal that served adequate eggs and excellent coffee, which is the correct distribution of quality in an airport restaurant. The conversation was easy. Renata talked about her kids, my grandchildren, Owen, who was 11, and Simone, who was 8, and who had both sent me drawings for my refrigerator the week before, which I had put up immediately, because grandchildren's drawings are the correct thing to put on a refrigerator, and I will not be argued with about this. Philip talked about the restaurant. The Oak Table in Knoxville had been open for 4 years, and had built a loyal customer base, but was in the sustained financial difficulty that good restaurants in mid-sized cities often find themselves in, where the food is excellent, and the margins are thin, and the gap between what the place deserved to do and what it actually did on any given month was a source of ongoing anxiety. He mentioned this the way he always mentioned it, carefully and without asking for anything directly, which was Philip's way of asking for something indirectly. I had given him $40,000 2 years ago to cover a cash flow crisis. He had paid back $15,000. The remaining $25,000 had not been mentioned since either of us was prepared to mention it. Renata had borrowed $18,000 from me in the same period, spread across 3 separate requests, each one with a specific stated purpose, and each one repaid in part and not in full. The outstanding balance was approximately $11,000, which neither of us had recently discussed. I am not telling you these numbers to paint my children as people who took from me. I am telling you these numbers because they are part of the landscape of what Miriam Cole was going to describe when she grabbed my arm at gate C14. They are the context that makes what Philip and Renata were planning feel less random and more deliberate than I wanted it to be. The gate was called at 9:45. We gathered our bags and walked to C14. Philip and Renata sat in the gate area while I went to find a restroom. When I came back, they were seated together, with their heads close in the posture of an ongoing conversation that adjusted itself when I appeared, not dramatically, but noticeably. The conversation became about the flight, about the connection time in Houston, about whether the seats had been assigned correctly. I sat down. I looked at them. I thought about Beverly, who had a gift I never matched for reading the space between what people said and what they meant. And I thought about what she would have seen in that gate area. Then boarding was called. We joined the priority line. Philip was ahead of me, Renata behind. I was 3 from the front when someone grabbed my arm. Miriam Cole was on the same flight. She had been seated in the gate area in the row directly behind where Philip and Renata had been sitting. She was a retired high school English teacher from Franklin, Tennessee, traveling to Houston to visit her daughter. She was not the kind of person who inserted herself into other people's business as a habit. She told me this directly, and I believed her, because the discomfort in her face when she stopped me was the genuine discomfort of a person doing something they do not do naturally, because they have decided it is the right thing. She said, "I wasn't trying to listen. I want you to understand that. They were talking quietly, but I was right there, and once I heard certain things, I couldn't unhear them. I told her to tell me." She said, "The man with you, your son." I told her yes. She said, "He was on the phone. I think with an attorney or someone in that line of work. He was talking about power of attorney, about having you assessed. He used the phrase cognitive decline. He said that the trip was a good opportunity because you would be away from your regular environment and in a position where you might display the kind of confusion that could support a petition." I stood very still. She said, "He mentioned a specific doctor, in Nashville, someone who had already been spoken to." She hesitated. "He said the doctor had agreed to conduct an evaluation on your return, and that the evaluation was going to go a certain way." A certain way. I looked at her. I said, "Are you certain about what you heard?" She looked back at me with the steady eyes of a woman who spent 30 years in classrooms full of people trying to convince her of things that were not true. She said, "I am a retired English teacher. I understand the difference between what was said and what I think was said. I am telling you what was said." I stepped fully out of the line. I said, "Miriam, what is your last name?" She told me. I took my phone out and I wrote it down. I wrote down her phone number when she gave it to me. I wrote down the name of the doctor that Philip had mentioned, which Miriam repeated twice to make sure I had it correctly. I said, "Thank you." She said, "I'm sorry. I know this is not what you wanted to hear before a flight." I told her it was exactly what I needed to hear before a flight. She rejoined the boarding line. I watched her go. Then I turned and walked back through gate C14 into the terminal. I want to stop here for a moment, because I know some of you are sitting with something this story is touching. The feeling of realizing that someone you love and trusted has been building something behind your back. The slow, terrible arithmetic of looking at moments you thought you understood and understanding them differently. The particular loneliness of that moment, when love and suspicion are in the same place, at the same time, and you cannot separate them. If you are carrying something like this right now, say it in the comments. Not for advice, not to be told what to do, just to put it somewhere outside of yourself, because the weight of this kind of thing doubles when it has nowhere to go. Tell me your story, whatever part of it you are ready to share. I read every single word. Philip called me before I had cleared the gate area. "Where are you?" His voice was measured, calibrated. The voice of a man who has noticed something has shifted, and is trying to determine the scope of it before he decides how to respond. I told him I had stepped out, that I needed a moment. "Dad, we're about to board. Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine, Philip. Go ahead and board. I'll catch a later flight." A pause. "Dad, what are you talking about? We have a connection in Houston." I told him to go. I told him I would be in touch, and then I hung up. I found a seat near the windows at the end of the C concourse, away from the gate traffic, with the Nashville skyline visible through the glass in the particular flat light of a Tuesday morning in September. I sat down. I put my bag between my feet. I took out my phone. My attorney's name is David Park. He has had a practice in Nashville for 26 years, and he has been my attorney since Beverly and I bought the house on Maple Creek Drive. He is methodical, unhurried, and has the specific quality of a man who has seen enough of human nature to be unsurprisable, which is the quality I needed most in the next 10 minutes. He answered on the second ring. "David," I said, "I need to talk to you right now." He said, "I'm here." "What happened?" I told him, all of it. Miriam Cole, the boarding line, what she had heard, the power of attorney language, the phrase cognitive decline, the doctor in Nashville whose name I now had, and who had apparently agreed to conduct an evaluation that was going to go a certain way. I told him the name of the doctor. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "George, I know that name." I waited. He said, "That physician had a complaint filed against him by the Tennessee Department of Health 2 years ago, relating to the validity of capacity evaluations he conducted in a guardianship case in Shelby County. The complaint was resolved with conditions. He is still practicing, but he is on a list that our office flags as a matter of course in elder law matters." Elder law matters. 2 years ago, David had gently suggested I formalize some elements of my estate plan in the context of what he called elder law planning, and I had done so because David suggested it, and I trusted David, and the phrase elder law had struck me as something that applied to people older than I felt. Apparently it applied to me now in a way I had not anticipated. I said, "David, what do I need to do?" He said, "First, don't get on any plane today. Stay in Nashville where your regular environment and regular relationships can support you if any of this moves quickly. Second, I want you to come to my office this afternoon. Bring everything you remember from that conversation with the woman at the gate. We need to document it while it's fresh." I told him Miriam Cole had offered to put what she heard in writing if it became necessary. He said, "George, call her now, before you do anything else. Get that in writing while she is still willing and while the details are still sharp." I called Miriam from the same seat by the window. She had just landed in Houston, the flight I was supposed to be on having departed 12 minutes earlier. She answered on the third ring, and when I explained what I needed, she said, without hesitation, "Tell me where to send it." I gave her David's email address. She wrote the statement in the Houston airport during her layover and sent it before she boarded her connection to her daughter's house. 4 paragraphs, precise, specific, dated, and signed with her full name and contact information. "A retired English teacher," she had written, "understands the difference between what was said and what she believes was said. The following is what was said." David called it the cleanest witness statement he had seen from a non-professional in 20 years of practice. What happened in the days after I walked out of gate C-14, I am going to tell you as accurately as I can, while protecting the parts of it that belong to my children and not to me. Philip called 4 times while I sat by the window. I let the first 3 go and answered the 4th. I said, "Philip, I know about the power of attorney plan, I know about the doctor, I know about the evaluation that was going to go a certain way." The silence on the other end of that call lasted long enough that I counted to 11 before he spoke. He said, "Dad," I said, "I'm not on the plane, I'm in Nashville, and I'm going to need you and your sister to come back here and have a real conversation with me." He said, "Dad, listen, it's not what you think." I told him that was something I was going to need him to demonstrate rather than assert. He said, "We were worried about you. You have been alone for 3 years and there have been moments where you seemed confused, and we were trying to protect you." I said, "Philip, the physician you spoke with has a complaint on file with the Tennessee Department of Health. You called him before you spoke to me. You arranged a trip to take me away from my home and my regular environment. And you discussed a timeline for an evaluation in a gate area with your sister without telling me any of it. I want you to tell me which part of that is protection and which part of it is something else." He did not answer. I said, "Come back to Nashville." He came back. He and Renata drove from the airport to the house on Maple Creek Drive on Wednesday morning, and we sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Beverly and I had sat for 23 years of mornings, and we had the most difficult conversation of our family's life. I am not going to tell you everything that was said at that table. Some of it belongs to Philip and Renata in ways that are theirs to carry, and not mine to display. What I will tell you is the shape of it. Philip had learned the total of my estate through a document. An old financial summary Beverly had sent him years ago during a period when she was updating the estate plan and had included him in some correspondence. He had held that number for 2 years and had watched the restaurant struggle and had made a calculation that I will not call evil because Philip is not evil. I will call it the calculation of a frightened man who looked at a problem and looked at a resource and found a way to tell himself that moving toward the resource was something other than what it actually was. Renata had been less certain. I could see it in the way she sat at the table. She had the posture of someone who had gone along with a plan and had not fully examined where the plan was going and was now sitting in the full light of where it had arrived. Her eyes were red before we had been talking for 10 minutes, and she pressed her hands together on the table in front of her in a way that reminded me painfully of Beverly doing the same thing when she was distressed. I said to both of them, "I need to understand something. Were you concerned about my mental state because you were genuinely concerned, or because a concern about my mental state was useful to the plan?" Renata said, "Dad, I'm sorry." Philip said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "Both. And I know that's worse than if it was only one." I looked at my son, 43 years old, his mother's eyes, my stubbornness in the set of his jaw. A restaurant he had built with genuine love and genuine food and insufficient margin, and the specific desperation of a person who has invested everything in something and is watching it not be enough. I said, "Philip, if you had come to me and told me the restaurant was in trouble, if you had sat at this table and told me you were scared and that you needed help, what do you think I would have done?" He looked at the table. I said, "Answer me." He said, "You would have helped." I said, "Yes, I would have. I have always helped. That was never the thing you needed to arrange around me. That was always just the thing you needed to ask for." He looked up. His eyes were wet. He said, "I know." I told him I knew he knew. That was the part that had hurt the most. David Park filed a formal letter to the physician whose name Miriam had given me. The letter documented what David called a pattern of professional concern and advised the physician that any evaluation connected to George Tillman would be subject to immediate independent review and that any petition for guardianship or power of attorney filed on any basis arising from such an evaluation would be contested vigorously and fully. The physician did not respond to the letter. The evaluation that had been arranged was never conducted. David told me later that the physician's office had received 3 similar letters from 3 different attorneys over the previous 4 years, which told me something about the kind of arrangement that had been in place and what it had been used for before it was used for me. I want to be clear about what I did and did not do with this information in terms of formal legal action. I did not pursue charges against Philip or Renata. This was my decision, made carefully and with David's counsel, and it was made for 2 reasons. The first was that what they had planned had not been executed. It had been stopped at the airport gate by a retired English teacher with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and the moral conviction to grab a stranger's arm. No evaluation had been conducted. No petition had been filed. No document had been signed that was not already signed. The plan had failed before it began. The second reason was Beverly. I sat in the house on Maple Creek Drive on the Wednesday evening after the kitchen table conversation, in the chair by the window where I always sat in the evenings, and I thought about what Beverly would have wanted. Not what she would have felt, what she would have wanted. For Philip, For Renata, for the family she had spent her life building at the table where her children had just sat, and told me what they had been planning. Beverly was not a woman who confused justice with punishment. She believed in accountability, and she believed in keeping the door open, and she believed that the people who hurt you most were almost always the people who were most afraid of something they had not yet found the courage to say directly. Philip was afraid of losing the restaurant. Renata was afraid of losing her financial footing. Both of them were afraid, underneath all of it, of losing me the way they had lost their mother, and had handled that fear in the worst possible way. Beverly would have seen all three layers. She would have held them accountable for the behavior, and kept the door open for the people underneath it. I did the same. I tried to do the same. Some days I succeeded more than others. The restaurant. 2 months after the Tuesday at gate C14, Philip came to the house and asked if we could talk. He came alone, without preparation or performance, in jeans and a jacket he had owned for 10 years, and he sat at the kitchen table and he asked me, directly and without framing, if I would consider investing in the oak table. Not a loan with an arrangement attached, not a plan built around anything except the question itself, just a father and a son at a table, and a question asked the way a question should be asked, with nothing behind it except the honesty of a man who had run out of every other way to ask. I told him I would think about it. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I talked to David. I talked to my accountant. I reviewed the oak table's financials, which Philip sent me, without being asked, and with a transparency that told me something had genuinely shifted. The restaurant was in real difficulty, but it was not unfixable difficulty. The food was genuinely excellent. The location was solid. The problem was operational and financial, not conceptual, which is the solvable kind of problem if you have the right support around it. I made an investment, a real one, properly structured by David, with terms that were fair to both of us, and that Philip negotiated line by line with the focused seriousness of a man who understood he was being given something he had nearly forfeited. He did not get everything he asked for. He got what the numbers justified. That is how it should work between people who respect each other. The oak table is still open. It is doing better. Not dramatically better, not yet, but the kind of incrementally better that is real rather than performed, the kind that comes from someone who has stopped looking for a shortcut and started doing the work. Renata and I had our own separate conversation in November, quieter than the one with Philip. Renata has always been the one who processes things deeply and slowly, and who arrives at the real thing later than her brother, but arrives there more completely. She told me she had been having nightmares since September, that she woke up some nights thinking about what would have happened if Miriam Cole had not been sitting in that row. I told her the nightmares were appropriate, that they meant she understood what had nearly happened, and that understanding it fully was the right response. She asked me if I would ever fully trust her again. I told her that trust is not a light switch. It does not go fully off and fully on. It is something that gets rebuilt over time through behavior, and through the kind of consistency that does not require anyone to be watching. I told her I was willing to rebuild it if she was willing to do the work of rebuilding it. She said she was. I believe her. Some days more than others. But I believe her. Miriam Cole. I drove to Franklin, Tennessee, in October to have lunch with her. Her daughter had told her I called, and she had called me back immediately, and when I suggested lunch, she said yes without hesitation, and named a place in Franklin that she described as reliable, which turned out to be accurate in every meaningful way. We sat for 2 hours. She told me about her 30 years of teaching, about her late husband Gerald, who had passed 6 years ago, and who she described with the particular warmth of a person who has finished grieving and arrived at gratitude, about her daughter in Houston, and her 2 grandchildren, and the trip she had been taking when everything happened. I told her about Beverly, about the house on Maple Creek Drive and the garden Beverly had kept in the backyard, and the way the house had felt since 2021. I told her about the restaurant and the kitchen table conversation and what had come after. She listened with the focused attention of a retired teacher, which is the best kind of listening, attentive and precise and genuinely interested in what you are actually saying, rather than in what she is going to say next. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I almost didn't stop you, you know. I almost told myself it wasn't my place." I told her I was glad she decided otherwise. She said, "My Gerald always said that the right thing and the comfortable thing are almost never the same thing, and that the difference between them is about 10 seconds of courage." She looked at her coffee. I had about 12 seconds that morning. That was enough. I looked at this woman who had grabbed my arm with both hands at gate C14 and changed the direction of my life in 30 seconds. And I thought about the 10,000 ways the morning could have gone differently. If she had been seated one row further back, if I had been earlier to the boarding line, if she had made the more comfortable choice. I told her, "Miriam, I want you to know that what you did for me is not something I can adequately thank you for." She said, "You don't need to thank me. I just need you to be all right." I told her I was getting there. She smiled. She has the kind of smile that a person gets after a lot of living has deposited something genuine underneath the surface, the kind that means something. She said, "Good. That's the right direction. I am going to tell you where things are today because you deserve the honest ending. I am still on Maple Creek Drive. The garden Beverly kept is in my care now, and I am a less talented gardener than she was, but I am a more attentive one than I used to be, which is the direction of progress, even if the gap between current performance and Beverly's standard remains considerable. Philip's restaurant is still open. He calls me every Sunday, not always about the restaurant, sometimes about nothing in particular. Those calls are the ones I look forward to most. Renata brings Owen and Simone to visit the first Saturday of every month. The drawings are still on the refrigerator. There are more of them now. Owen is going through a phase that involves what appear to be battle scenes involving robots, which I display with equal pride to the flowers and rainbows that Simone produces. A grandfather does not rank his grandchildren's artwork. David Park updated my estate plan in October. The documents are now structured in a way that is transparent, properly protected, and not susceptible to the kind of approach that was being arranged in September. David said it was the cleanest estate plan he had built in years. I told him that was because I had had a very clear reminder of why clean mattered. And Miriam, we have had lunch 4 times since October. She is, it turns out, an excellent lunch companion, which is a quality I do not take lightly at my age. She reads widely, holds opinions with conviction and without rigidity, and has the specific gift of talking about difficult things without making them heavier than they need to be. Beverly would have liked her immediately. I am certain of that. I am 67 years old. I live on Maple Creek Drive in Nashville, Tennessee. I was 3 people from the front of a boarding line when a stranger decided that 10 seconds of courage was worth what it cost her. She was right. It was worth everything. If this story reached something in you tonight, if it touched something you have been carrying, or something you needed to hear, then before you go do this, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel because there are more stories here, more strangers who showed up at the right moment, more people who held their ground when someone they loved tried to move them, and every one of those stories deserves to be told. Drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from, your city, your country, and if something in this story found a match in your own life, if there is someone who showed up for you when you needed it, or someone who tried to take something that was yours, or something you have been carrying quietly that this story loosened, put it in the comments. Say it. You do not have to carry it alone. This community is here, and it is full of people who understand. My name is George Tillman. I am 67 years old. I walked back through that gate, and I called my attorney, and that plane left without me. It was the best flight I never took. Thank you for staying until the very end. Please note, scripts developed with AI writing assistance, narrated and produced by our team.